What was your high school's tragedy? Hey everyone, just a quick content warning before we get into this. There are quite a few mentions of people taking their own lives and essay in this thread. If that's something you are not comfortable listening to, then this is your warning to click away now. Thank you so much, and on with the video. Arguably the most popular teacher in our school, for his boundless love of his students and incredible mentorship, took his own life the year after I graduated. We found out he'd been struggling with drug addiction and depression for most of his life, which blew us all away. I'm well acquainted with the deceptions of depression now, but at the time, it rocked my very foundation. This was the teacher who had students flocking to his classroom almost every lunch break just to hang out with him. He was so awesome and caring. We'd rather be there than at freaking Quiznos or wherever. He played card games with us, discussed literature and film. We all shared stories. He would play guitar and jam out with other student musicians. He brought me flowers when I was lead in a school play once. I'll always be heartbroken over the world's loss of this wonderful man. Story 2. I remember one day my algebra teacher didn't show up for school, and one of the other teachers said she took a vacation, which was weird, because my teacher was the kind that was always telling her students everything, and everyone liked talking to her, so a lot of people knew about her life, and she would have mentioned if she were planning a vacation. 5 months passed, and then our school tells us that she passed away, but never told us how. Her family invited a lot of the students to the funeral since they knew she was close with her students, and they told us that according to the hospital, she just died? Like, they never gave her family any explanation or reasoning, just said, she passed, and they weren't sure how. I think a whole lawsuit went down between her family and the hospital afterwards. Story 3. We had a very nice kid stabbed in the abdomen for wearing blue in a blood neighborhood. He wasn't a gang member, just someone wearing the wrong color. The knife hit his appendix, which was already infected, and it burst. He'd survived, and honestly, I think he became motivated by the whole thing. Still scary and sad, though. Story 4. Some jocks and upper echelon popular kids who were a few years behind me were driving around drunk and jumped a steep embankment at a railroad crossing. They lost control and died. The community ground to a halt. The grocery store where I supervised at was mostly high school kids, and it was disgusting how they milked those kids' deaths. They would call off work, get in arguments over who missed them more. The most disgusting part was, someone hacked the Twitter of one of the girls and started tweeting stuff from beyond the grave, which is just disrespectful to the parents. Well, after some time passed, it was concluded that they jumped the tracks twice. The first time they landed no problem. It was the second time when they lost control. Now, this is the part where I sound like a jerk. While it was sad that kids had died and a parent should never have to bury their child, they knew that if they were going to jump an embankment like the Dukes of Hazzard, they were taking their lives into their own hands. This was 6 years ago, and to this day, I don't even feel remotely sad or bad about what happened. Yeah, I gotta say, I'm with OP here, I think. While my heart goes out to their family and everyone who's affected by their losses, they knowingly took on absurdly risky behavior. And, loss of life sucks. But it's also not like they were a victim of anything. Truly, though, I feel terrible for the parents involved. OP is also right in saying that no parent should have to bury their child. Story 5. A few days before graduation, a kid in my class who was a complete jerk was driving his Mustang at 100 miles per hour down a road in town that had a 45 limit. Another guy was crossing the road with his dog in the car and was T-boned. All 3 died. Everyone in school suddenly knew him and talked about what a great kid he was and yada yada yada. Personally, I feel bad for the family who lost their father and dog, and feel little to no remorse for the little jerk who murdered them. It's an unpopular opinion, but I totally get how that last story feels. Story 6. One of the popular kids from high school died doing something dumb at uni. Never got the full story. He was drunk, walking around a highway or something. Now a bunch of the popular high school kids that bullied me through elementary and high school advocate and tell their stories through an organization his family set up because he had mental health problems. I may just be cynical, but seeing as most of his friends were giant jerks who probably did their fair share of damage to others mentally throughout high school, it frustrates me to see them talk about their past struggles dealing with mental health. People can change, but I feel like it's just moral self-pleasuring. Story 7. A guy at my school took his own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. Hardly any response by the school. A year later, a girl dies in a car wreck. Everyone in the car was drunk, and suddenly there are memorial services, reflection periods, time off school, the Student Name Memorial Fund. Nothing against her. She was a nice girl, but the response was definitely not proportional between the unpopular poor kid and the popular rich kid. I remember when they were announcing the reflection time, even one of the popular girls leaned over to me and said, "They never did this for that other guy." The preferential treatment was plain as day. I'm sure some of it was the way in which each kid died, but hopefully that is changing these days. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I feel much more sympathy for someone who took their own life from sleeping pills than dying in a car wreck where everyone in the car was drunk. I just find it a more tragic situation, thinking about a kid who felt like they had no way out except for that. Whereas drunk driving, while it can be the same thing, usually isn't. It's just a really stupid decision you make one day. Story 8. Had a kid at my high school drunk drive home because he was late for his curfew, was on probation and had an ankle bracelet. I believe he was going 70 in a 35, lost control of his car, it got airborne, and slammed into a tree. The kid was ejected from the driver's seat, through the window, and hit the tree, dying instantly. What's strange is how everyone remembers him as such a wonderful person. He always seemed like a jerk to me personally. I just went along with the grieving. His death did motivate me to never drunk drive, though. Story 9. We had a kid, more unpopular than popular, kind of a pothead and kind of a slacker, but nice, who took his own life over a girl. The school didn't really say much except, "Don't take your own lives." A couple weeks later, the most popular cheerleader got hit by a train and lost her life. We had grief counselors, meetings in the auditorium. We took the rest of the day out of school that day. There were signs erected. They put up a new crossing guard on the train track crossing. She has a memorial inside the trophy case at the high school. Basically, the rest of the year was full of things dedicated to her. Now, nothing against her. It was very sad and very tragic. His was due to his own deliberate actions, but it showed everyone, especially those closer to him on the social ladder, including myself, where we stood in the school. It further demoralized the already at-risk youth and pushed them further away. It was the first time I knew for sure that the school teachers and administrators had favorites. Story 10. There was once an utter piece of crap who polluted our town with his pathetic stain of existence. He stole multiple times a week/night, usually from old people so they could grab him if he got busted, regularly beat the crap out of people smaller than him, got younger kids into drugs, and was plenty more, including a loudmouth, racist, coward, and violent vandalizing thug. One day at the weir, kind of like a dam but not really, his younger brother fell in and was drowning and he jumped in to save him. He did save him but drowned himself instead. Nidoc week was very soon afterwards and they had a big vigil of remembrance for a, quote, kind-hearted hero who gave his life for someone else. And for weeks it was like this and how more people should be like him, never mentioning crap about how he was a known yet unconvicted predator, thug, druggo, and just all-around degenerate. He was only 20 or something, and I'm a very understanding and compassionate person, but at least the world only had him for 20 years, and at least he managed to do one memorable thing before he died, even if it was at the very last moment. Hope he comes down kinda hard on this guy. But if everything they're saying is true, I won't say it's necessarily undeserved. It's weird, my brain doesn't know how to process this act of heroism compared to a life of, not great actions. Because at the end of the day, he did save a life. Story 11. A super nice but awkward black kid from Jamaica was killed in a car accident on prom night. He wasn't one of the popular kids by any stretch, but the administration went all out for him. We had a memorial, hundreds showed up to his funeral, and they started a college grant in his name. Another kid died the same year. A super popular football player was driving his brand new Mustang GT entirely too fast, tried to pass on solid lines going up a hill, and lost his life instantly in a head-on collision with a truck. Others were seriously injured, but no fatalities. The school did nothing for him except hold a meeting in the gym where we somberly talked about reckless driving and being a responsible citizen. Story 12. Future football star was driving down a poorly unlit street that was said to be haunted. I don't remember if he was drunk, but I think since it's a two-way street, he got caught off guard and ran off the road, crashed, and died. Then we had a freshman who was biking on his way to school and was hit by one of our counselors. Kid flew and lost his life instantly, I think. He was in the JROTC program. Football star's death was widely publicized, foundation in his name made, a dedicated plaque on the wall, etc. Freshman? Nothing. We were reminded yearly of football stars passing over the morning announcements, and it made my blood boil. Still does. Story 13. My high school had 5 people take their own lives last year. One of them I knew well. 2 of them got memorials, the rest remain obscure to me. The school basically immortalized the first 2. The first guy possibly did it because he was facing statutory SA charges, shrines, vigils, you name it. Second kid took his own life in the parking lot, which also got a shrine. After the third one, the school pulled a 180 and stopped immortalizing kids who did it. They took down the shrine to parking lot kid and his family threw a fit. It was a crap show. People have their priorities, and schools typically deal with people taking their own lives in the worst possible way. Story 14. I haven't been in high school for almost 10 years, but something happened 3 months ago. Played football with both guys. First guy was kind of known for being weird / having issues, but I still made it a habit to at least talk to him and be somewhat of a friend to him. He even had a mental breakdown after one of our football games because he dropped a pretty crucial pass that would have set us up to win or tie the game. I was one of the few that still talked to him, even though I was pretty conflicted about it myself. Second guy had jerky behavior but wasn't completely a jerk. He was just one of those guys that tried too hard to be popular, and was popular because he pretty much forced himself into the popular crowd. He had likable qualities, I knew that, but I could just see through some of the crap. Fast forward 10 years and I haven't really talked to either of them in quite some time. But I haven't heard anything from the first guy. Second guy joined the military, gets deployed, yada yada yada. My mom and the second guy's mom are friends, and so are a few of the other football moms from high school. About a few months ago, I see from the first guy's sister's Facebook that he had passed away from what I assumed was him taking his own life, considering she said he dealt with mental issues his whole life. Not even a week later, the second guy does it, and we still aren't really sure why because there was no note or anything. He had proposed to his girlfriend in the summer and they were supposed to get married sometime this summer. I just remember seeing that the first guy had died and almost next to no one said anything about it, and that didn't bother me until the second guy passed. That's when my Facebook was being blown up by RIP second guy and will miss you second guy statuses. I mean, even typing this whole thing up really screws with me, because I even specifically remember seeing one guy who posted a status saying RIP second guy, and the guy that posted it would berate him all the time in high school. First guy didn't get anywhere near that type of treatment and probably should've. I even had people texting me asking if I had any pictures of second guy because he was like a brother to us. I mean, yeah, we were close because we played football, but people think that we're best friends because our moms were good friends, and that's not necessarily the case. Had I seen either of them before they died, I would have talked to them, shot crap, reminisced about high school, asked how they were doing. I'd be cordial with them, but I know I'm not best friends with either of them. I don't know. I don't know why I'm typing this, to be honest. Just have had this on my chest for a while. I don't know if any of this made sense, but it felt good to say and type it. Story 15. One year at my high school, 2 Mexican kids in a predominantly white, somewhat affluent school took one of their parents' cars out drunk driving, wrapped it around a tree or pole or something, and both died. Later that year, a preppy football player took his snowmobile out on a lake that wasn't frozen enough to ride on, fell through, and died of hypothermia. All the while his friends that were with him had warned him not to do it and watched helplessly, from what I heard. Did anyone give a crap about the Mexican kids? Well, besides their clique of friends, didn't really seem so. But the football player's locker was made into a shrine. Moment of silence. They even made those Live Strong type bracelets and stickers for people's cars with his jersey number. I think they retired his number too. The difference was sickening to me. In both incidents, the kids died because of their own mistake. It wasn't like one made a bad decision and the other was murdered, but it hardly even registered to most of the school that 2 other kids had also died that year. Story 16. One of my friends, good kid but quiet and a bit shy, was mainstream until we got to high school. He started taking some alternative, read special ed classes because he was struggling with epilepsy and died tragically during a grand mal seizure. He got a mention on the announcements and the school had a small memorial for him the following spring. His picture was shown in the middle of our graduation year's memories slideshow thing shown at graduation. Hardly anyone cared, even though he was an all-around friendly and caring person. The following year, 2 of our star sports players, the quarterback and a girl soccer player, died in a drunk driving accident after they went to a party. They were all drunk, way over the limit, got into a car with a former student, dropout, who decided to speed around the neighborhood, got air on a hill and slammed into a parked car and wrapped around a tree. Driver survived. There were memorials and events for almost the whole following year. They got a whole dedicated memorial with a moment of silence during their graduation. It was an absolute tragedy. Word from my friends who knew them, the girl was generally a nice kid. Not a wave maker or anything, but the quarterback? Egotistical jerk who probably made fun of kids like my friend who died from the seizure. Story 17. I went to an AG school out in the middle of the grapevines where there was this weird dynamic with the farmers' kids. Like, you think of farmers being all poor and working the land, but they were actually the rich families with the popular kids, and a group of undocumented immigrants working the land. Anyway, these kids were all hard partiers, and drove really beautiful new cars and trucks. Several years after I graduated, a group of these farm kids, most of them athletes as well, got absolutely hammered at a saloon, yes, a saloon, out in the vines that had no problem serving minors. They crashed into another car full of sober kids just driving into town to hang out, and if I recall, everyone lost their lives. But you can guess who got the memorial trees and all that crap. I was long gone and didn't give a crap about high school anymore, but I've always been upset that it was the jerk drunk kids that got memorialized in that situation. Story 18. I knew a kid in my PE class senior year. I'll call him Dave. He wasn't well liked despite being great friends with a popular kid. Dave was always goofing around and trying to be funny. He wasn't. People often told him to screw off, but at least he was always in a good mood. I'd joke with him, but we weren't friends. Near the end of the year, Dave was racing another kid with his popular friend in the passenger seat. They crashed and his friend died. Everyone was upset and angry at Dave. From what I understood, no one made the other kid get in the car, and both were known to race. Dave never came back to school. 3 years later, I was at a local college taking classes and I bumped into Dave. He was a shell of his former self. I tried to say hello and ask him how he's been and what he was studying. He just looked at me in a daze and just smiled when I recalled funny moments from class together. I'm sure the whole thing affected him deeply. I feel like 2 people lost their lives that day. Story 19. A senior lost her life in a hit and run. It was only a few weeks into the school year and her family had just moved to California from New York. No one really knew her. It was partially her fault. She was walking to school on a foggy morning and needed to cross the street. The signal she was at didn't have a crosswalk and she didn't want to go to the next one up, so she jaywalked in the fog. A van hit her and fled the scene. It took them 3 weeks to find him. They ended up putting a crosswalk at that signal afterward and put up a memorial to her in the yearbook. So don't jaywalk on foggy mornings. Even if you don't think there are cars, they can't see you, you can't see them, and fog can distort sound. Story 20. A popular girl in my class went to a party, got drunk, and decided to drive home, head-on with an 18-wheeler. Not only lost her own life, but ended her friend who she was driving home. This girl was not only popular, but extremely well off. This happened almost 20 years ago, and her parents have spent a fortune trying to rewrite history. You basically can't find it anywhere except the original newspaper article that her death was the result of drunk driving. At graduation, the school had an empty chair in her honor, and that empty chair would now be at every graduation from that point on. This is an old school founded in 1930. Plenty of tragedies had happened where a student lost their lives while attending. None of them ever got a memorial. We also had a giant memorial page on the front inside cover of our yearbook. There is now a street named after this girl in the town where the school is. There's also an annual golf tournament named after her. The whole thing is disgusting. This girl's parents could have done something good to help bring awareness to young people. Instead, they want to make sure no one remembers their daughter was stupid and ended herself and her friend. I will not forget. The following year, another kid lost his life by a drunk driver driving home from school. School didn't do anything for this kid. No yearbook memorial, no mention at graduation, nothing. Of course, the kid was unpopular and from a poor family. Story 21. In my junior year, one of my friends took their own lives. She posted on her Snapchat story that she was really sorry and the timestamp was a few minutes before she did it. It really hit a lot of people. Almost all the sophomore and junior class went to her funeral. A year and a half later, another one of my friends took their lives. It had the same impact. His funeral had almost everyone from the senior class there. No one was the same after that. I forgot that my school also was the host for the Yes All Daughters. 3 girls came out and said that I think one of the football players SA'd them, and the school officials didn't do anything about it. And so the Yes All Daughters movement was made. It was huge and we got a lot of publicity for the case and movement. I don't think I will ever understand the preferential treatment for athletes in schools. I guess preferential treatment isn't completely right. Because like a school spitting out a sports star, it's pretty important. Like, it's big for the school. It gets them a lot of publicity, probably money, sure, whatever. But covering up for them is ridiculous. Like, newsflash, athletes can be pieces of garbage. And when they are, they should be treated as such. I don't know who the school thinks they're protecting, because it doesn't even look good for the school either. I don't know, maybe I have a naive and optimistic worldview though. Story 22. From a small town, but sadly, there's a few. One kid shot himself on the only main road connecting the 2 towns that made our high school. Wasn't really a surprise, but still hit a lot of people hard. Another guy who my sister was actually dating thought it would be a good idea to drive drunk and flipped his truck. The bar that sold him the alcohol was shut down. One guy was really distraught about his ex dating someone else, so he found them in my buddy's field where she worked and murdered both of them. Extra. Elementary school, not high school. There was a first grade girl who was being babysat by her sister and her sister's boyfriend. They were playing Mortal Kombat and decided to test out some of the moves on the little girl and accidentally, I guess, ended her life. They tried to cover it up by shoving an egg down her throat to make it look like she choked. That last story flashbanged the hell out of me. What do you mean they were playing Mortal Kombat and they decided to test moves on a first grader? What do you mean? Who thinks that? Maybe video games do make you violent. That's a joke. Story 23. I went to a fairly large high school, 3,000 students, so the odds of a tragedy were higher. Freshman year, I remember 2 seniors who were best friends died in a car accident over the weekend. The following Monday was incredibly somber on campus. About a year later, a kid took his own life due to bullying. The high school yearbook wound up running one of his poems, and it was very obvious that he wanted to take his own life and was begging for help. Then there was the time a kid fell out the back of a pickup truck while his friend drove too fast out of the school's parking lot and had to use a wheelchair/walker for the remainder of his time there. All of his friends seemed to abandon him once he was handicapped. It was sad to see. There were also 2 back-to-back automobile accidents just days after graduation. I remember seeing those as obits in the local paper during summer vacation. Story 24. Our school had a beloved teacher in our foreign language department. She was like a second mother to many students and was a good friend of my family. My sister has a learning disability and was taking her class at the time. The teacher was very understanding and did everything she could to help my sister do well, even outside her class. Her husband was a coach and their kids were of course going to our school, so their family was well known and well liked in the community. They were all involved in a serious car crash. Someone tried to pass a large truck and failed to check for oncoming traffic. Their car was hit head on. The teacher and her husband lost their lives. One of the 2 kids ended up in the ICU for a long time. The other had minor to moderate injuries. The people in the other car lost their lives as well. Our school and community were devastated. My sister developed driving anxiety due to the incident and couldn't get her license until she was 21. Such an awful thing. Story 25. There was a real nice guy, Eagle Scout I think, friendly and a good student. His friend, someone he trusted, crept into his house one night undetected, walked upstairs, murdered the guy's parents in their sleep with a knife, and then murdered him after a struggle. The sister heard noise and was able to flee to a neighbor and call 911. PA state troopers went on a manhunt with bloodhounds. The dude's dad eventually turned him in after he confessed. The sister was the sole surviving family member. The only motive the police could find was something the murderer wrote, saying he hated happy people. The whole thing was screwed up, still is. The murderer ended up ending himself in prison a year or 2 after, as multiple state Supreme Court rulings denied his petition to reduce like 3 life sentences he was serving. Story 26. Near me in eastern PA, we had the murder of a high school student when he was finishing his shift at Burger King. A guy dismembered his brother and drove around with him in the trunk. A lady got eaten by her pet bear. A dude murdered 3 township officials when they tried to force him off his land for having no plumbing. A guy murdered his father and his disabled son because he was tweaking and thought they were spying on him. A 31-year-old guy got a 12-year-old pregnant and helped her dispose of the fetus after instructing her on how to self-abort with a pencil. A guy screwed around with his coworker, murdered her, and buried her body on his land. Crap is weird. Story 27. Me and this other kid were in the closet. We both knew about each other because we saw each other cross-dressed at a comic book convention, but nobody else really knew for sure. In his case, he was more bi than gay, and could totally play the straight guy role well. I was more effeminate, and people suspected, plus people knew I cross-dressed. Then I was outed/came out. So we never hung out because he had to keep up appearances, but we chatted on AIM about relevant stuff because he had no one else. Anyway, long story short, nerd crap got a lot more popular in the mid-2000s, and someone saw his cross-dress at a con. They made fun of him on MySpace, and he hung himself before school even started. Lots of kids who led the charge were crying at his funeral, his mom and dad chatting people up on his AIM trying to find out what happened. It was pretty awful. Story 28. When I was a freshman in high school, a girl in the grade above me was diagnosed with cancer. I can't remember what type. Anyway, it got really bad and things weren't looking good. She had a younger sister in my grade, and me and her actually became each other's closest friends. Around the end of my sophomore year, she went into remission, and eventually got all her hair back and everyone was relieved. Sadly, a little bit into her senior year, my junior year, they went in for one of her scheduled scans, and she was diagnosed with leukemia. Now me and her younger sister are close to graduating from high school, and although she had missed her own commencement and first year of college, she recently went into remission again about a month ago. Over the summer, her sister, whom I'm very close with, even had to give her a bone marrow transplant, which went well. Seriously, these two girls are some of the kindest, strongest, and most optimistic people I've ever met. Side note, I'm taking her to prom this year since she missed her own, and her sister are going to be roommates next year in college. In this thread, it's nice to have a more uplifting one. Still absolutely a tragedy involved, but something about it has good vibes, you know? Like, OP just seems like the sweetest human on earth, and any story of someone fighting cancer and winning is great to hear, especially amidst a sea of awful things. Story 29. When lunch was shut down early and canned drinks were banned because of the great lunch battle between the Asians and Friends and the Death Metal Kids. The Death Metal Kids owed a small Asian by the name of T-Money some weed money. T-Money goes to collect his debts, and the Death Metal Kids close in on him. These Death Metal Kids were a collection of about 20 awkward big guys with the cut fingertip gloves and all. I assumed they thought they could punk T-Money, who was only like 5'5". They start shoving T-Money like a ping pong ball. Then a great wall of thug Asians storm in, and the ping pong session erupts into a massive brawl. This is when it gets fun. One of the Death Metal Kids ends up throwing a can of some kind of drink and cracks someone right in the face. This person ends up being a bystander and a really popular athlete. His whole lunch squad decides to reinforce their fallen leader and, by de facto, T-Money. By the time the Death Metal Kids realized that they were getting flanked, it was too late. They started dropping like flies. It ended up being like a 30-person battle royale. By the time everything was broken up, like 15 kids were in supervision and a few were sent to the hospital for their battle wounds. The popular kid ended up with a fractured nose and black eye. The school threatened to take away activities if people didn't give names, but no one gave in. So they just banned all canned drinks, which led to the Asian kids hustling 12 packs of soda for like 2 months until they gave back can privileges. My friends and I were inclined to help out Death Metal Kids because one of them was on our football team, but decided to just throw things at the mob of people instead. First of all, it sounds like a scene out of a movie, especially the part about hitting the jock in the face with the can and then they join the fight. Second of all, I don't know if this is a tragedy, OP, unless you really missed those canned drinks for a couple months. Thanks for the story anyway. Story 30. We had this absolute star athlete. He was an academic, the quarterback, a total stud with the ladies, and he was respectful to everybody, really cared about everyone he met. He had a good home life and a great future ahead of him. Nobody knew he was depressed. I didn't know him that well, but the news of what happened hit me like a ton of bricks. He was a senior getting ready to graduate as valedictorian when he jumped from a 15-story car park in downtown. We went to a small private high school of about 200 students, and we all just sat in the gym listening to the teacher tell us what happened. Some of us already knew, but most of us were told then. It was gut-wrenching listening to the gasps and cries of people who knew him for so long. We miss you, Dupe. Story 31. We had a school shooting in the 90s before it was cool. Well, it wasn't really a school shooting. The high school was in a dodgy neighborhood. We had to evacuate one side of the building so the police could raid the crack house across the street, and a lot of stuff happened in and around the school pretty regularly. One day there was a drug deal gone bad, a snatch and run. The thief ran into the school during lunchtime and the dealer pursued. The dealer fired several shots with a stray bullet hitting a sophomore in the thigh. I swear that was her greatest moment because for the next 2 years, she didn't shut up about it. Anyway, we made the news and the ghetto birds descended. In an act of defiance, students laid down in front of the school spelling out, "Screw you," with their bodies. The live footage did not make the evening news and seems to have been lost forever. Story 32. About 6 years ago, a girl and a few of her friends were heading to our town's festival in the evening, like 8 p.m.-ish. When they were walking in front of the school, a car came speeding down the road and hit them. One girl died in front of the school and they never found out who did it. Another, although I believe she was in middle school, but it happened on the same street. It was New Year's Eve late at night, and a group of kids were crossing the street. One of them dropped their phone on the crosswalk. One of the girls ran back onto the road to get her friend's phone when she got hit by a van and lost her life. Story 33. A girl in my year, but not my school, started coming to my youth group. After a few weeks, she confided in us she had a lot of mental health issues, was on many medications, and had tried to take her own life multiple times in the past, and in general was just struggling with life. It slowly came out that she had been essayed by her uncle for years, and he messed her up so much she was just a shell of a person. Our youth group didn't meet over school holidays, so we had a 2-week break where we didn't see her. I remember so clearly the Sunday morning. My mom picked me up from my part-time job to take me to youth group. She told me that my friend had attempted to take her own life earlier in the week. She had been found by her parents, but by the time they had her stomach pumped, she was already brain dead. They had turned her life support off this morning. It was so brutal. She had been bullied so much by the bickering kids at her school. It was an absolute disgrace watching them all fall apart at her funeral. They acted like it was such a big tragedy, but they couldn't have cared less when she was alive and struggling. It was like a game or something to win. Who was closer with her? Who had more classes with her? It was sickening. Even 13 years later, I can't let that go, and I think about it often. I hope she found some kind of peace. I miss you, Sarah. Story 34. When I was in 10th grade, a kid in my grade brought a pipe bomb to school. He told people and the police were called. It wasn't detonated in the school, but we were evacuated and knew what had happened. 8 to 9 years after graduating, he died of an H overdose. The year after I left, a wonderful senior girl died in a car accident after being driven home from school. Her best friend, the driver, survived. Since we've graduated, H overdoses have plagued the area. It'll probably have taken 25% of our class by our 25-year reunion. Story 35. I'm pretty sure a high school friend I was super close to was a victim of H addiction. She got into it from an abusive ex-boyfriend and then miraculously cleaned up. Found a girlfriend who treated her well and was putting her life back together. Lasted over a year. Then she dropped off the face of the freaking planet, and nobody who had contact with her except maybe her father had seen a hint of her. I saw her once a few months after she vanished getting onto a bus, and I think I'm the last of my high school class to get to see her. Been 3 or 4 years since that, just gone. I've looked heavily. No missing persons report or anything, so I imagine her father that did care about her knew something. Story 36. One kid got stabbed to death in the bathroom. He was a senior that had just moved to our town that year. The kid who stabbed him was autistic, and afterwards ran to the guidance counselor telling them what he had done. Apparently he was into violent video games and they blamed his behavior on wanting to act them out. He's now in prison. Recently, a math teacher retired and her husband were stabbed to death by their estranged son. Also, a student that enlisted in the military ended up dying overseas. They had us line up outside as the funeral procession drove by. Another kid crashed into a tree and died. Some freshmen got hit by a train. We used to get a lot of bomb threats too. One day, the kid I sat next to in English didn't show up and it turned out he'd been caught calling them in. One teacher got fired for grand theft auto, which involved helping students park a school van in the cafeteria as a senior prank. One of our janitors did adult films, pretty average high school crap. Story 37. When I was a sophomore in college, a student burned herself alive by the track. Apparently her last status update was, "When there's nothing left to burn, set yourself on fire." She suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns to a crazy high percentage of her body, and she died within a day or so of being admitted to the hospital. I suffer from depression and have been wanting to take my own life more times than I can count. But the day I heard about what this girl did to herself, I called my parents and promised them that wouldn't happen to them. Story 38. We had a couple folks in my high school die in car accidents, but one guy in particular was a very popular senior who missed a turn going way too fast and smashed into a tree. I didn't know him, but obviously it was a very somber experience. A couple days later, our school's lacrosse team was playing a neighboring town, and when we took a bit of significant lead, they started chanting, "Hit a tree," until our team was too upset to finish the game. I hope that school got a big talking to. What do you mean you're chanting, "hit a tree"? What is wrong with you people? I get that they're still kids. Sure, but yikes, man. There's insensitive, but then there's that, because they knew it was going to upset them. That's not insensitive, that's malicious. Story 39. When I was in middle school, there was a kid who was on his way to school and ended up getting into an accident and died instantly. His mother, who was driving, was left with only minor injuries. She basically had to witness the death of her 12-year-old boy, and it completely devastated her, as well as many staff and students. They cut the school day short and offered grief services to anyone who needed it. It was a really sad day. Story 40. A girl a year ahead of me was in an awful car accident around the start of her senior year. She spent over a year in recovery while her classmates ran fundraisers and gathered support for her family. It was projected she wouldn't be able to walk again. As she recovered, she started working on her schoolwork again while in therapy. Ultimately, she walked across the stage at my class's graduation ceremony, without assistance, to get her degree. You could hear the cheers for miles. Story 41. This is my school. If they're not on drugs, they got pregnant or had kids. A lot of the kids in my class died in the streets due to being junkies. I got caught up in jail on some crap, and while I was there, an old school friend showed up, and let's call him B-Dog. Well, B-Dog used to be hot stuff. Popular football player, dating a cheerleader, rich, the whole 9 yards. Being rich, he got into drugs really hard. Enter being in jail. We were sitting around watching 8 Mile, and they throw a couple of new guys into isolation. We pass this off and keep watching the movie. The next day we meet the isolation guys, and one of the dudes is B-Dog. B-Dog's face is all screwed up from doing drugs. He's tweaked out of his mind and can't even put a damn sentence together. Screams every time he talks. We start talking and he tells me how he got hooked on H and stole money from his granddad. Story 42. I did a cyber school program, but at the local high school where I would have gone had I not been in the online curriculum, a high school teacher got caught up in an intimate relationship with a student for years. He took his own life last year at age 19, a year after graduating. No one was able to directly connect their relationship to his death, but it certainly could have been emotionally burdensome to him and his identity, and both parts are really crappy nonetheless. Story 43. The beloved band director vanished 3 days before a big concert, never to be seen again. People were very upset. Girls sobbed while playing the concert. Then, a couple of days later, we found out what actually happened. It turns out the band director, who was in the middle of a divorce, got a little too close with the drum major. The cops found them in the back of a car. They were just, quote, talking, with no pants on. I'm pretty sure no charges were filed and he was allowed to quit instead of being fired, so that POS was able to go and get hired in another school. Story 44. We had 3 incidents in our school. In grade 9, a kid in my class named Clinton died in a boating accident. He and his cousins went tubing and he got caught in the propellers. 2 years later, the head boy, 1 year older than us, died in a car accident. He and a few friends went to a neighboring city to watch a club rugby match and got a lift on the back of a truck. The truck rolled on the highway, only taking his life. A few others ended up in the ICU. The last one happened in my final year, grade 12. A kid named Paul took his own life. He was struggling with depression and was taking a shower before being booked in at a center. He suffocated himself in the shower. The school had services for all 3. The head boys was huge. We had messages and letters from other schools and could write our own messages on a board by the quad. Our biology teacher even let us make his parents a card in class. Paul's one was surreal. We were all brought into a room in the boarding house and the news was broken to us. It was a mixture of silence, crying, and just blankness. We got a week or 2 off school and just processed it. It was tough. His memorial was touching. They showed us a video of him after going diving in the holidays. And bonus, 5 years after school, another kid from my year, Neil, lost his life in a car accident. His car rolled on the highway just behind the school, and he died on the road. May angels lead you in, saints. Story 45. I went to a school with an enrollment of about 1,200 for grades 9 to 12, so not big, but not small. We had 3 tragedies my freshman year. Luckily, there were no more for the rest of my high school career. First, a very popular and well-liked senior died in a texting and driving accident. I never met her, but the Friday before she died, she was trying to run in heels to class and lost a shoe. I picked it up and gave it to her, and she thanked me with a big smile. Sad day the next week. Not long after, a junior attempted to take his own life over a girl he was having a rough patch with. He was a redneck kind of guy, but nice, with a lot of energy and a good disposition overall. He shot himself through the mouth with a .22 caliber rifle. He did it in his truck, at church, with a service going on inside. The girl was attending that service. He survived but was left a shell of his former self. He's got a mindset of a small child, lives with his parents, has a pony that he adores, and a children at play sign by the road in front of his home, although he's an only child. He's 27. Finally, most personal to me, a freshman classmate was shot by his stepdad through the heart while attempting to shield his mother from the stepdad's rage. They'd had a fight, and my friend ushered his 3 brothers out a window before trying to intervene. He died almost immediately. The stepdad, who is now in prison, then murdered his mom as she ran out the door. Rest in peace, Jemias. Hell of a man for a 14-year-old. Story 46. 3 kids from my high school were murdered by a serial murderer. They were staying a few houses down from each other one night. One was babysitting a kid and was strangled to death. The other 2 were dating and staying together when they were found stabbed and strangled as well. They never even caught the person who did it, which made everyone uneasy. Story 47. There was a kid who shot himself with his dad's gun. I didn't know the kid or anything about him, but from what I understand, he was gay, and his dad was a cop, and he shot himself with his dad's service revolver. It was a big deal at the time. Lots of girls crying in the halls, free counseling, and so on. Later on, I was a teacher at a Chinese high school. A kid took his own life in the school in the middle of class by swan diving out of the 8th story window onto the concrete playground below. Apparently, he got a low score on a test, tried to cheat on his makeup test, got called out by the teacher, and ended himself on the spot. I wasn't in the class at the time, nor was he ever my student, but the contrast in how kids felt about it couldn't have been more stark. My students were actually joking about it within a week. The general statement was that he was weak-willed and dumb, essentially victim blaming. I couldn't believe how blasé about death the kids were, especially such a dramatic incident right at the school in front of some of their eyes. The parents apparently tried to blame the teacher, and the school essentially told them to screw off. It was their fault if they raised a cheater who couldn't handle getting caught. They weren't well connected, so there was that too. I don't know if they even got their tuition money back. It was an expensive school. Story 48. This was in middle school, but that kind of makes it suck even more. A very popular girl needed to have brain surgery for what, I have no idea, and didn't make it back to school alive. None of us students knew she was having surgery because her parents told her, and she told us, that she was simply going on vacation for a couple of weeks. But just before she left, everyone gave her hugs and told her to have fun. Little did we know, we would never see her again. Story 49. I saw a fight between two students in the hallway. A very small teacher went to break it up and got in the middle of it. She got punched in the eye and it broke her eye socket. Because of this, her left eye sagged a quarter or half inch lower than the other. I figure you can get this fixed by a plastic surgeon. I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but it was incredibly sad. It didn't end there, though. We always had a local cop who was at our school every day. He showed up probably 10 or 15 seconds after she was hit. He tackled this kid like an NFL linebacker. It broke this kid's arm so bad the bone was sticking out of it. It was vicious. I was just standing there in the hallway with this teacher on the ground screaming and blood coming from her eye, and a kid with a bone sticking out of his arm screaming 10 feet away from her. I couldn't believe it. Story 50. A kid in the year below was always a bit of a troublemaker. One day he does something in class during the morning, and he's summoned to the head of the year's office and suspended for the rest of the day. Next day we hear that he was home alone and had a seizure randomly and choked to death on his vomit. His sister came home after school later and found him. The head of the year was so upset and blamed herself. She no longer decided to keep that position and just wanted to be a regular teacher, later moving schools. Then, when I was in senior high, one of the older kids recently got their driver's license and took 3 friends to McDonald's between classes. On the way, a lorry turned over and crushed the car they were in. All perished. It feels like in these situations, either they never take responsibility, or they take responsibility when they don't have to. That woman sounds like she really just wants the best for children, and she wants them to grow and learn. So hearing about a death that she thinks she caused probably just shattered her spirit. I promise her, it's not your fault. Just a freak accident. I don't think the kid deserved it either, just to be super clear. Just a really unfortunate situation all around. Story 51. A crazy girl and her boyfriend, my friend, murdered the girl's grandparents she was living with. They caulked up the room, they locked them in, and proceeded to have parties while there were dead people in one of the rooms. This went on for a week until the neighbors got suspicious and called the police. They were then caught and locked up. Really crazy when you hear stories of people you actually knew. You mean ex-friend, right? You mean a friend that you used to have, not your friend currently, right? Story 52. The big one that happened when my sister was still attending school was when this girl was hit by a drunk driver and lost her life. They named the children's section at the library after her. When I was still in high school, though, it was this one wrestler who was thrown off the mat and got a bad head injury. He survived and recovered, but he had pretty severe amnesia for a few weeks after. I didn't know the guy, but apparently it was really disturbing to a lot of his friends when he wouldn't remember them. Story 53. During my freshman year, our much-loved superintendent was convicted of embezzlement. Another freshman tidbit, the eldest brother of a family of 4 kids was convicted of S.A.ing and murdering a woman and then dumping her body in a dumpster behind the local Kmart. My sophomore year, I watched an idiot kid try and psych out a car by pretending to jump in front of it. He proceeded to follow through and was struck by the car driving just in front of me. I've never seen my mom move so fast to get out of a car in my life. The kid survived, but with serious cranial injuries and partial paralysis. Also from sophomore year, a social studies teacher had been working there for almost 20 years. Large man riddled with health issues and was paralyzed from the thighs down. Died from iodine intoxication. He was on vacation with his wife and visited the all-you-can-eat seafood buffet 2 to 3 times a day. That, in conjunction with his already poor health and cocktail of meds, sadly ended him. My junior year, there were 2 kids who took their own lives, as well as multiple bomb threats, vandalism, and a lunchroom riot. And senior year, friend of a friend plays hooky from school with a group of people, discovers a loaded gun at the house of whomever they were hanging out with and starts screwing around, as idiots do, shoots our classmate in the face. 2 more people taking their own lives stem from this incident. I graduated high school in 2003, and every single year since then, there have been no less than 2 people I had known personally that have died. Maybe 3 to 4 of those deaths were illnesses, but almost all of the others were self-induced or drug-related. Story 54. In middle school, a girl ran away from home with her friend and ended up dying. Just for context, this happened in Phoenix, Arizona. She had run away before, but this time they both went to a, quote, friend's house. This guy was 18 and still living at home with his 45-year-old mother. He started encouraging her to drink vodka, and she quickly drank about a fifth in 30 minutes. She started seizing, and they just left her there. In the morning, they drove around and finally threw her body behind a dumpster. Honestly, it was awful. She was in my homeroom class, and I talked to her a few times, although we weren't close. I can still remember my teacher's face when she told us she had died. Those tears are definitely etched into my memory. Story 55. A kid took his own life with a shotgun in front of his friend's younger brother, like elementary school age young, when they were at his house. Students were devastated for the rest of the semester. B, not high school, but the owner/teacher of a driving school near me drowned during Harvey. The community was heartbroken to see that on the news. And C, a school within the same district. A coach got accused of assaulting a female student, but her story fell apart pretty quickly. Even though his name was cleared, the damage was already done. He lost his job, couldn't get hired anywhere, and people would still think he did it all along. He ended up shooting himself in his car in a parking lot. It might have been the high school he got let go from. Story 56. When I was in 8th grade, a freshman, his grandfather, and one other were murdered in a hate crime shooting by a white supremacist looking to take Jewish people's lives, which he failed at, as none of them were Jewish. The Westboro Baptist Church showed up to picket, but luckily, our community created a human chain to stop them from interfering with the funeral. It really hurt the high school, but afterward, his mother created an organization called 7 Days that celebrates religion and diversity. About 3 years later, our most beloved football and track coach died from an aneurysm, which was also devastating. Story 57. A girl named Madison ended herself because one of the female teachers bullied her about being overweight. When she tried to tell the school and change teachers, the school told her, if you're going to be fat, you need to learn to deal with bullying. A bunch of students got together and told the principal, and he expelled her for making things up. Her dad beat her pretty badly. I was one of the last people to talk to her due to us having a chem project together. I was at work and told her I would talk later. Had I known what would happen, I would have quit that day and called her. I wasn't really close to her, but it still hurt knowing I could have maybe done something. To this day, that teacher still works there, and the official report doesn't even mention that part of her note. Strange that they seem so confident saying it in these private situations, but when challenged on it, they'll deny it, almost as if they know they did something wrong. How odd. Story 58. About 2 years ago, a girl who lived sort of close to me shot and ended herself a couple days before school started again. No note. Really devastating. The other one happened beginning of this school year. A kid in my biology class was with friends and they were supposedly high. Someone had a gun that fired and he lost his life. This happened not even a full week in, so everybody was messed up from it. He was also extremely well liked. Story 59. 2 events from my high school years. First case was a car in the shop class fell and crushed the head of a student under it. They lost their lives instantly. The description from an eyewitness only needed 2 words to describe it. Gallagher watermelon. Second was a popular jock and his girlfriend in his convertible leaving from a football game. He got sick of waiting in traffic and decided to cut the line and hop the curb at speed. Apparently, he forgot that the front of the school had a barrier fence made by 8-inch across posts every 10 feet with a 1/2-inch wire cable looped from post to post. He managed to put the car between the posts. The cable scraped up over the hood, over the windshield, and then snapped down to the top of the doors. They were both decapitated. Needless to say, alcohol was involved. Story 60. Within 2 years at my high school, we had 1 person take their own lives, 3 people die in separate car accidents, a girl from the cross-country team get her head run over by a semi, and then a brother and sister who didn't want to go home because they were afraid of their dad. The counselors refused to let the kids hang around, so they went home, where the dad ended them. He then took the life of their mother, and then himself. Also a soccer player who was hanging out of a sunroof when the car crashed. He had brain damage. He came back to school and died on the soccer field soon after. Oh, then a jerk baseball player decided to spear a third baseman to make him drop the ball, and the dude who speared the guy broke his neck and was paralyzed. He died a year later. My school was cursed for sure. Story 61. I'm 40 now. Things are different for high school kids than they were when I was a kid. I noticed it when my kids were going through high school. When I was young, not so much education was pressed upon us upon the dangers of drinking and driving. I mean, we knew it was bad. MADD was an organization we all loved to make fun of because of their theatrics. Mothers Against Drunk Driving. We didn't have dramatic recreations of accidents or days where our friends were dead for a day. Occasionally, they'd throw a car that had been in an accident on the lawn of the school with no story behind it, but that was all. What we did have was in memoriam pages in every single yearbook for every year that I was in high school for people who died in drunk driving accidents. Every year. It might have been homecoming, prom, after a football game, but every year a group of kids from my high school died driving drunk. What's screwed up is that it wasn't abnormal. Things have changed, though. My kid's generation is smarter than the last, or at least better educated on the dangers. I'm proud of how far we've come. Story 62. Kid jumped off of a 3/4-story science building onto the quad pavement and took his own life during lunch. A lot of kids that sat near it are still very shaken up about it too. Been almost 7 years since he passed, and the school really takes mental health seriously now. Rest in peace, Drew. It would have been nice if they took it seriously before this happened, so it didn't have to happen, but at least the school has changed their views now. Better late than never, I guess. But rest in peace, Drew. Story 63. Some jerk went to the talent show a few years ago and flipped a bottle to some music, and then everyone else started doing it. Oh yeah, and some mentally unstable football player threw a chair at a teacher, got a scholarship, and was found vaguely not guilty of murdering his girlfriend's dog. Story 64. One of my teacher's kids drowned at his birthday party. Everyone was inside, but the little one wandered outside and climbed into the pool. Nobody noticed he was gone until it was too late. I think he was really young, only like 3-ish. That really changed the teacher, according to people that had known him for longer. But he was still the kindest man I've ever had for a teacher, and he's someone I still look up to this day. Story 65. The hottest girl to ever walk the planet. Our class, Hottie, who was also a crazy brain, got a free ride to Cornell. She got knocked up her sophomore year of college by some rando, dropped out, got pregnant 3 more times by another 2 guys, 4 kids by 3 guys total by age 25, gained 200 pounds and lives in her second trailer. Her first got seized by the police after her then boyfriend was caught cooking ice in it. She had future astronaut written all over her in high school. Now she's a sad episode of Jerry Springer. Story 66. Girl I went to school with went from Tampa, where we lived, to Arizona with her family. Mom, dad, and 5-year-old sister. Dad was a pilot, and I worked, believe, for the ATF or FBI. They were going to the Grand Canyon. Somewhere over Arizona, something happened. Plane crashed into a high school. All 4 died. It was surreal. It was all over the news. It was like the entire community died for a month. Story 67. Best teacher I ever had died of cancer. I'm not even sure how to talk about it. One of the greatest tragedies of my life. And I'm sure there are other students who were closer to him than I was. I was out of the country at the time and had no idea. My brother just called me long distance one January and told me that he was dead. I hadn't even known he was sick. It had only been 2 years since I left my hometown. I really thought he would be there when I got back. Life is short. Call the teacher. Tell them how much they meant to you. Don't assume they'll be around forever. Story 68. Quite a few years ago, some kid was mad at his girlfriend for dumping him or something. Went to her class at the start of the day with a shotgun and shot and murdered the kid who opened the door when he knocked on it. The class had a system where the person sitting closest to the door opens it, and the kid who sits there every day moved seats for a project, so he was spared, while the poor kid who sat there that day lost his life. This happened in Canada. I can't even fathom how much of a loser you have to be. Just deciding that some random kid is gonna die because you're upset you got dumped or whatever. I mean, really, nothing justifies this, just to be super clear, but just insane, disgusting loser behavior. Story 69. There were a few. One of the most beloved and one of my favorites, also being a father figure to me, teachers, went into cardiac arrest while he was playing basketball with some students. He left a wife and 2 young children behind. He dropped on the spot and died right there. May he rest in peace. A student, female sophomore, lost her life in an accident. She was riding with her parents, them being at the front and her at the rear. They were on the highway and I guess traffic was mounting up. They stop behind a semi and another semi rear-ends them, effectively sandwiching the car. She lost her life on impact. Her parents lived. I can't imagine the pain they went through. May she rest peacefully. Not my high school, but it was a tragedy that affected a good sum of the teachers at my high school. He was a teacher at one of our rival schools, and he took his own life by decapitating himself using a railway car and the tracks. If I remember correctly, he lost everything that was dear to him and couldn't take it anymore. And lastly, I witnessed a student get struck by a speeding car right in front of my school. There's an intersection which I usually cross with other kids after school to get home. The first wave of school kids were already crossing, so I waited for the next wave. One girl was kind of lagging behind the group, and one moment I'm looking at her, and the next she's flying through the air. The car screeches to a halt and she's sprawled out in the middle of the intersection, surprisingly still conscious. She let out one of the most blood-curdling screams I'd ever heard. Thankfully, though, she survived. Story 70. People taking their own lives and drug overdoses were rampant at my school. I can't count on my hands how many people died in just 4 years. Forget about after graduation. The saddest stories, though, are one girl went to her boyfriend's too drunk on New Year's and woke up in the middle of the night, crashed her car into a pole right outside of the school. She was under 18 and needed parental permission, but they were New Year's wasted and didn't get the phone call. Other one was a girl who got her leg cut off in a boating accident, ended herself a few years later. She was doing really well, too. Story 71. Story is 2 girls snuck out on the last night of spring break to go to a guy's house. Mom woke up and found the girls were missing. The mom said the girl's brother was coming home from Tampa. An hour north, it was his 19th birthday, and he was going to come pick them up and take them home. They are on the street to turn into their neighborhood, a residential area with, I believe, a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit. He was going 99 when he slammed the car into a wall. Well, I'm pretty sure he hit something else first, because one of the girls wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was ejected from the car. She actually hit the wall first and the car fell on top of her. The other girl was in the back seat, still alive. Made a call to her stepdad, but he didn't pick up. She ended up dying before police got to scene. I still get chills talking about the story because it was so horrific. This was spring break of 2011. I was in 10th grade. Then, in the same year, May 2011, a good friend of mine took his own life. He was one of the smartest and funniest people I grew up with. It's really sad when you have no idea what people are going through. Story 72. Every year, senior students had their own common area to hang out in, way off in a quiet back corner of the campus. Had a kitchen with a fridge, microwave, toaster, kettle, etc. A small room to hang out in, and an outside area with shade, park benches, and tables. It was 100% a seniors-only area. My senior year was when the school decided to do some renovations. We didn't get the common room. We got a common area in the alleyway between campuses that literally everyone walked through. No room for a TV or anything. No privacy. Maybe this is wrong to find this funny, but amidst all these genuine awful tragedies, people losing their lives and everything like that, there's this? Like, OP did not read the room. Oh man. Story 73. My environmental science teacher was one of the sweetest teachers I've ever had, and one of my favorite teachers. She was always so happy and cheerful and would brighten my day. No student ever had a bad thing to say about her. She was diagnosed with breast cancer before I was in her ES class. My senior year I took her class, and in the spring semester my class celebrated her last round of chemo, and being declared cancer-free with a small party. Less than a year later it came back, and she lost her battle this time. Story 74. My high school didn't really have a tragedy while I was there. The year after I graduated, though, a girl I liked hung herself in her mother's bathroom following an argument. In the 4 years I was there, we'd had several bomb threats in 1 year, a bathroom catch fire, a water main burst, a gas leak, someone tried to burn down the darkroom in the photo lab, the entire cheer team getting busted drinking at a party the week before state competitions, breaking a 5-year championship streak, missing the field goal that would have broke a 10-year homecoming game losing streak. A few people got hit jaywalking but lived. All in all, interesting but not a true tragedy. Story 75. Junior year, the Monday after Easter. A classmate of mine lost his life when he veered into oncoming traffic while driving to school at 6 a.m. He was a tremendously nice guy, student athlete, and a large portion of the class had known him since pre-K. We're coming up on 10 years since he died, and most of the time I don't think about it, but sometimes I remember, and I get sad. All our teachers rearranged their seating charts afterwards, and we kept figuring out which desk had been his, and leaving it empty anyway. Story 76. Not a tragedy per se, but definitely up there for travesty. My black teammate, football, was cornered by the few punk wannabes in my school. He was beating the crap out of 2 of them when I got into it to handle 2 more. Our vice principal decided to intervene without announcing himself, and my buddy knocked him out without seeing who it was. I got a week's suspension and he got reassigned to the school for scumbags and screw-ups. Took almost 3 months to get the school board to hear his case. This is Texas in the late 90s, by the way, at a then 5A school. I had to threaten to drop out entering senior year to get his case heard. I was the starting LT, so they were having none of that. It disturbs me to this day 20 years later what a better person he is than me, and yet I had to throw down a gauntlet to get him some attention for an overblown incident. OP, I gotta give you a shout out for standing up for your buddy like that. I feel like there are a lot of people who would be too scared to lose what they have. Even that minuscule chance that they're just like, okay, go then. You knew that what happened was messed up though, and you fought for it. So hell yeah, OP. I hope your friend really appreciated that. Story 77. So this didn't happen when I was there, but it did when my sister was. There was this kid who started missing a lot of time from school, and he seemed pretty stressed when he was there. It later got revealed his mom was pretty ill and he was looking after her. One day he went to the pharmacy to get her medicine, needed to cross the road but didn't walk all the way down to the crossing and then back again, so he ran across and got hit by a car. He died instantly. A week later, his mum died as well. There's this little garden and a tree fenced off outside the science block dedicated to him. Story 78. I grew up in a rural town with a school that ran from K to 12 with about 450 students. During 10th grade, this girl I knew fairly well took her own life. She hung herself in a barn on her family's farm and her mom found her. She had a twin brother. It was incredibly difficult because everyone knew her and had a story about her. I had spoken to her many times during our basketball sessions and she was always cheerful and happy. Earlier that year, she had gone through an accident and was left with major spine injuries. Apparently, the note she left when she ended herself said that she experienced an amazing dream state while she was high on painkillers, and she wanted to return to that state. Story 79. Everyone was devastated that some football players from around the school district got insanely drunk, decided it was a good idea to drive some expensive car while super drunk, and they ended up crashing it. Big surprise. However, 3 of them died on the scene. 1 survived. People still have bumper stickers for it. I feel really bad for their families, but the students had it coming. Story 80. During my sophomore year, my best friend took his own life. To this day, I have no idea why. During my junior year, a teacher's son came out as bi. He was bullied, living in a very conservative and Republican city/state, and subsequently took his own life after. During my senior year, a kid was hit during a football game and suffered an aneurysm during halftime. 5 years later, there have been 10 more people who took their lives, and 12 drunk deaths that I've lost classmates to. Story 81. My senior year, a girl lost her life and several other people were injured when they rolled their vehicle returning from prom. The worst part is that she had a twin brother who was not with her at the time. He graduated with our class, but without her. I don't know either of them well, but I still think about how awful it must have been for him and their parents. She was such a sweet person. Don't drink and drive, people. Even worse, the driver became a paraplegic, but continued drinking and driving, and hit and ended another young woman a few years back. I think he's in prison now. Story 82. Not as serious as some others here, but an old friend of mine, let's call her C, had struggled for a long time with the depression. We weren't exactly really close friends, but if I see her alone or she posted something sad on Facebook, I would message her, try to make her feel better. Well, she took her own life. She hung herself. I think among everything, the thing that hurt the most was that the last thing we talked about was her coming to me and saying how she was disappointed in me, and how someone said I was an assaulter. I couldn't bring myself to go to her candle lighting held by our school or her funeral. It still haunts me today. Story 83. In a school of about 1,000, and this is by far the largest incident we've ever had, a lad in the year above me passed out randomly while walking around the school. I was one of the very few people who actually saw the ambulance come or really figure out what was happening before the situation had ended. He was rushed to the hospital, fell into a coma, and died years later. Really nice lad, one of the quieter but sweet guys. This was about 2 years ago now. Edit. The cause of death was a brain hemorrhage. Story 84. A girl a few years ahead of me in school that was a star soccer and basketball player, lead in the school musical, band member, top 3 in her class, and member of a well-known family in our small town, got caught with weed and a pipe in her locker one day. She broke down in the principal's office when the police confronted her. When she got home that night, she shot herself in the head. About a month before that, another popular senior had gotten a scholarship to play college soccer, but had died in a car wreck on his way to school when his car hit a patch of ice and he hit a tree head-on. Still gut-wrenching to think about that time. My older sister was close with both kids and she was inconsolable for weeks. Story 85. A senior from my sister's class lost her life in a car accident. The story is tragic. They were 3 pals visiting another friend at the hospital. Broken arm or something, don't remember. So the kid in the hospital is like, I want food from insert his favorite place, which is just like a kilometer away. So the 3 dudes set off to get food. The driver was speeding like crazy, eventually crashing against a tree. The car was totally, completely, uberly messed up. Kid in passenger seat died. Kid in the back now has permanent brain damage. still functional, only hard for him to communicate, and the driver is deeply scarred psychologically for life. He is a good man and an excellent professional today. This all happened exactly 3 months before their graduation. Oh, also, hospital kid no longer eats from his ex-favorite place. It brings him too many bad memories. Finally, since my mother was very supportive to the dead kid's family, and eventually she and the mother became good friends, I got to meet the kid's sister. She's my age and love her like my sister. She even graduated with me. Just imagining any kind of harm happening to her makes me want to destroy whatever's causing it. Such a strong girl. Very beautiful, too. Anyway, that was shocking. This all happened just short of 4 years ago. Story 86. In high school, we had 2 kids whose mother was murdered. I honestly don't remember much of it. They were a few years below me, but I remember it in the media a lot, as the story was, quote, sordid. The mother lost her life to a contract murderer who was sleeping with a woman who the father of the family was also having an affair with. She was stabbed to death in the family's kitchen. The father took them out for ice cream so that it could go down, if I recall, and pretended to not know when he walked back in with the kids. Edit. Found some details buried in an article. There were 3 kids, 2 at my high school at the time, and the father took them to the video store to rent some movies, apparently. Minutes later, he allowed his young children to find their dead mother's brutally stabbed body. I remember the school talking about the kids being taken out of classes and stuff, not sure what ended up happening to them. The verdict? Michelle Burgess and Kevin Matthews jailed for life with 30 years non-parole. David Key jailed for life with 20 years non-parole. Also, 2 days later, Burgess was arrested. She had begun an affair with a Jason Colenso, who interfered with witnesses in the case. In 2010, a prison officer resigned after beginning an intimate relationship with Burgess in jail. No idea what the deal was with her that lured all these guys in. Story 87. At my old high school, which was fairly large, around 1400, had some students involved in a gang who called themselves the Roast Busters, play on words of Ghostbusters. They would find young girls who were students at my school, also around the ages of 13, 15, and would intentionally intoxicate and gang assault them. They also made a Facebook page bragging about it and posting videos and images of the abuse to these girls. I think I speak for everyone when I say I hope these people never see the light of day. However that comes to be, that's not up to me, but I hope it's the case. Story 88. There were a couple in my school. My senior year, a sophomore threw himself off a bridge because of bullying. The next year, a good friend of mine that graduated at the same time as me was shot and murdered by her boyfriend who was a senior then. He got off completely free because, quote, it was an accident. But she told me on several occasions she was afraid he was going to take her life, and she made me swear not to tell anyone. By the time I realized the full extent of how bad it was too late. She had died. I didn't even hear about it until almost a week later. Story 89. At my school, we had at least 4 people from my class die between the start of our senior year and the end. I was pretty close friends with one of the people, a guy who was loved by everyone and a very happy, wonderful guy. He ended himself a couple months before we graduated. A couple friends and I put together a service for him because his parents were too heartbroken right away. We put together a slideshow and we all said a few words. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I stood there and watched as his dad cried to my mom, saying he didn't see the signs. None of us did. The second girl that ended herself didn't get as much attention. She kept to herself a little more. I barely knew her, but I remembered a couple interactions with her, and she was sweet, and always seemed so nice. Another girl got shot by her boyfriend on accident. He said he didn't know the gun was loaded. And finally, a girl died from cancer. A year that was supposed to be fun and amazing was dark and dreary. Story 90. A girl who's in some of my classes, who I believe was in the top 25 of the school, lost her life in a car accident by a drunk driver just before graduation. School had pretty much just finished and we were awaiting graduation. One night I was at a friend's house having a get-together celebrating the impending graduation when a friend of mine gets a call that consisted of a lot of "what" and "are you kidding?" He told everyone she lost her life. The wake would be that weekend, and the party pretty much stopped right there. She was a super nice girl from what I remember, had a large scar on her chest from where she had heart surgery when she was younger, so she had already had to deal with that all throughout school. Then all of the accomplishment of getting into the top 25 just gets taken away in a single night, right before graduation. Story 91. Our beloved assistant principal had a brain aneurysm and died suddenly when only in her 30s. Our principal was sobbing over the school-wide intercom as she announced her death. She had been a great mentor to a number of students, and her sudden and unexpected passing passing devastated them. There was also a horrific car accident where a couple students lost their lives and several more were injured. It took place a year or two after I graduated. Apparently, the kids were going to skip the last day of school and go to the beach. One of the tires had a blowout on the interstate. The vehicle swerved off the road and into the woods. I felt really bad for my old principal, though. The last thing he did before he retired was conducting a memorial service for several of his dead students. Story 92. One of my friends jumped to his death back in high school. The weird thing was, nobody had any idea why. No letter, no hint of depression, even his grades are all right. His family's not strict. His group of friends tried looking if there was a girl involved, but nada. It's such a surreal feeling when a friend just ceases to exist. It made us feel numb. I sometimes like to imagine that he just moved to another place, like what happens in most high school friendships. Story 93. A bunch of high school hoodlums who like to consider themselves part of a city gang from my high school were playing with a gun. They were at a home not too far from the school, and I guess the kid accidentally shot himself or his friend shot him or something. Anyway, they panicked and called a friend to try and help resolve the mess. The plan was to cut up the body and burn it, as the upstairs neighbor woke up because of the smell of gasoline. Only reason they were unable to commit arson was because they didn't know how to properly use matches. And after I graduated, a history professor got arrested for having child content. Story 94. We had a boy who had been a quadriplegic since he was a very young child due to a car accident. His care was very intensive, but that didn't stop him from getting into films and literature. He was in several clubs relating to these things, always liked to write, always surrounded by friends. Every so often, his motorized chair would have alarms start going off if something went wrong or he stopped breathing. In elementary, it was terrifying. By high school, it was old hat. Whichever parent was with him that day simply took him somewhere quiet and got everything in order again. One day towards the end of our senior year, I remember because he had been accepted into several colleges, we came in to find out he had passed away. I guess what happened was his father was home alone that night and something had failed. His father just didn't wake up in time. It was too late by the time he woke up. I'm not sure what happened to the family after that. I tried to look them up but couldn't find anything. It was incredibly sad. Story 95. We had 2 student deaths almost exactly a year apart, November 9th of '08 and November 11th of '09. First was a homicide. 18-year-old senior shot in the head outside a house party. Died in a hospital a day later. I didn't know him well, but there was still a shock of it all. Just the realization that someone you used to walk past in the halls is just gone like that. The second student I did know. We weren't best friends or anything, but we were in the same circles and we did have some close friends in common. He ended himself inside the school in a stairwell behind the auditorium where, if I had to guess, he figured no one would find him until it was too late. His body was found by a teacher and a school security officer. If there's one small mercy in this case, it's that at least it wasn't a student who found him. The trauma in that case was compounded by the extreme insensitivity of our principal, who was so afraid of copycats that he steamrolled through the grieving process. We weren't even allowed to give him a memorial page in our yearbook. Story 97. It was right after graduation, but it affected the whole school, except the freshmen. I'll tell it from my point of view. Tuesday night. I have 5 people whom I call family that are not actually related. Eric is one of them. On that night, Eric and I were supposed to go to an EMT class we were enrolled in, but neither of us could shake the feeling that we desperately needed to find a friend we hadn't seen in a while. We went looking for our friend Andy, but ended up finding Richard and Jeff instead. We decided to hang out and got a half-gallon of Old Crow bourbon. Not much more than that, except I got really upset. I drank 15 shots and didn't even catch a buzz. Not one single bit. Jeff and Richard left after a bit, and around 11, Eric, who was sloshed, and I, stone cold sober, went to sleep. Wednesday morning, 8:30 a.m. Someone began knocking on the door to the house we called the H-Den because of the damage the tweakers who lived there before us had done. I woke up as I didn't live there anymore and was on the couch. At the door was Eric's brother asking us if we had heard about Cassie and Daniel. That's when he tells us Cassie is dead and Daniel is really hurt from a car accident. After some confusion, we learned that it wasn't Cassie's brother Daniel, but another kid with that name. We also found out there were 2 other people in the car, one injured, one dead. We immediately go to the school to check on a friend of ours who we were worried about. When we get there, the place was insane. Groups of kids crying, hugging, and comforting each other. Turns out that Cassie is very popular in the school, something I hadn't known. Fast forward to her funeral. I've been to a lot of funerals. My birthday seemed to murder people for like 7 years, but I'd only seen one funeral this big. It had been for my brother, and he didn't deserve it. There was no church service, only graveside. That was to accommodate the fact that our entire graduating class and most of the sophomore, juniors, and seniors from the school had come. There were people there I didn't even know she knew, but that was Cassie, the greatest person I've ever met. When I first met Cassie, she was a jerk. I hated her guts. But a few years later, after a funny happenstance, she became one of my best friends. She cried on my shoulder. She was the person that taught me how to be around girls. I was the only person she trusted to drive her car. She was my inspiration for moving from my hometown and doing something with my life. When I found out early senior year I was going to be a father, she was the first person I told, and she kicked my butt for being dumb. And then she told me to step in and be a dad. After high school ended, we got busy with work and with life. We hadn't seen each other in a couple months, and she came to the den to pick something up. We ended up giving her a ride home. The last thing she said to me was, "I love you." And although I know she meant it platonically, the sincerity and shock of it got to me. I didn't know how to respond. I wish I had, though, because 3 weeks later, she was dead. Story 98. A boy and a girl lost their lives in an ATV accident when he hit a tree head-on in the dark. The girl was 3 grades ahead of us and a track star that had been accepted into several Ivy League colleges. The boy was in my grade. He was loved, would have been valedictorian, a baseball star, class president, and the first person to be my friend when I transferred in halfway through 4th grade. There was a 2.5-hour wait to get into their wakes. The entire town attended. Students, teachers, parents, businesses that had sponsored the boys' Little League team, even members of rival sports teams. Story 99. Honestly and sadly, there was a death every year of my high school career. Freshman year, one of my friends, not super close like best friends, thought she had cancer and took her own life. Turned out it was just cysts on her ovaries, which were common. Sophomore year, a kid was accidentally shot in the face by a friend at a party. They were all playing with this gun and it went off. Junior year, well, just after, girl who was set to be our valedictorian had a brain aneurysm and passed away. Senior year, this guy was taking a stove across town and it fell out of the truck on the highway. He and a friend stop to pick it back up, and a kid driving an SUV doesn't see him. He pushes friend out of the way and gets hit. Separate incident. When I was in 6th grade, there were these 3 brothers in the same grade, a set of twins and their younger brother. I think the twins were held back at some point. One of the twins was suspended from school, and to keep him company, the younger brother skipped school. They find their grandpa's gun in a closet and start playing with it. The younger brother accidentally shoots the twin in the shoulder, and he lost his life. Horribly tragic for a bunch of 12-year-olds. You can't just have guns lying around where kids might be, man. I'm no expert, but don't they have to be locked up in some capacity? I feel like there's a rule about that, but maybe I'm too Canadian to understand. Anyway, OP, these really are just tragedies. Your school went through a lot, and I can only hope that the tragedies have sort of eased off for you now in life. Being around that stuff all the time is bound to mess you up in some way. Story 100. I live in Canada, and around the month of March, we had an unexpectedly warm day after a really harsh winter. A really sweet girl at my school decided to go canoeing since the weather was so nice. Her boyfriend brought his guitar and they were planning a romantic afternoon on the water. They weren't wearing life jackets because the water was only chest deep. They didn't think there was a need for it. The canoe capsized and the water was still freezing cold despite the outside temperature being so nice. The girl went in a shock and drowned in the shallow water. The boyfriend made it to shore and had horrible hypothermia. The whole time he thought the girl was behind him, but he was so disoriented from the cold water. It was such a tragedy because she was such a lovely girl who everybody loved. I know we always say that when someone dies, but she really was so kind. Story 101. Just 2 months before my class was set to graduate, one of my fellow seniors took his own life. He had been struggling with depression for years before that, and his life was really a mess, but he would have graduated alongside all of us. I considered him to be a really good friend of mine. His locker was 2 doors down, and we shared 3 classes each day where he sat close to me. It was rough having to deal with the emptiness of it all after that. The funeral was even worse. It was held at the church he went to, and his parents also showed up, and they had basically dumped him on his grandparents so they could divorce and live their own lives without bothering to talk to him. I know it tore him up when they did that, and it annoyed me that they thought they had any right to show up. Story 102. In my freshman year, so a little over 2 years ago, a senior boy was murdered in his own home. The murderer entered the house because the door was left unlocked, walked into the bathroom where he found the boy taking a shower, and then stabbed him several times. The boy's 12-year-old sister was in the house when this happened. While this went down, she ran to her neighbor's house. The neighbor took his gun into the boy's home and shot the murderer dead. Apparently it was all over some girl. I never looked into it that much beyond what I had mentioned. The murderer was some 21-year-old college student. I remember the murderer's father blaming the boy for this all happening. In my sophomore year, so last year, another senior died. It was during the weekend. Some kid was walking down the street in front of the school when a truck drove by and ran him over. The truck driver was never found. The screwed up part was the school never acknowledged his death. That same week, there was a girl my age who got into a car accident and broke her leg. This accident happened because the girl was texting while she was driving. The school wouldn't shut the hell up about it for the rest of the year. This stupid female dog got treated like an angel. She still gets treated like an angel. She put her life and, more importantly, other people's lives in danger and got rewarded for it? Screw her. Story 103. There were 4 instances I remember, though I know I'm missing some. One girl died in a car crash. She got T-boned by a semi and shattered her everything. Her boyfriend took his own life on the year anniversary of her death via a rifle shot through the chest. My grandma was his neighbor and heard it happen. Another guy took his own life in a pawn shop. He walked in and asked to see a shotgun off the wall. He loaded it with a shell he had in his pocket and blew his head off. Then there was the motorcycle wreck. 4 kids decided to ride their motorcycles at midnight, drunk as skunks. They both had their girlfriends on the back and drove head-on into a fence. Guy 1 was decapitated, according to the other's girlfriend, who survived with a brain injury and 2 broken arms. Other girlfriend was crushed by the bike. Other guy was thrown into a ditch and broke his neck and died. I think something like 1% of my entire senior class died. Story 104. When we were like 17, a girl in our year broke up with her boyfriend of like 6 months. They were both pretty popular, jokey characters from what I remember. I don't know exactly why he did it, but the guy who'd been broken up with threw himself in front of a train. I can only assume other stuff was going on. After this, the girl totally blamed herself, and one of her parents died shortly after. She posted on Facebook something like, "It's too much," and took her own life on the same tracks. Worst thing was seeing all the comments on the status from friends and family asking if she was okay, where she was, to answer her phone, etc. They both seemed like straightforward, happy kids. It was horrible. Story 105. 5 deaths in one school year. A girl in my grade hung herself. A kid in my brother's grade shot himself. 2 brothers, one of whom I was lab partners with, died in a car crash. A former student and son of a teacher died in an accidental overdose. This all happened within 5 months. It was a tough time, but these tragedies have brought to light mental health awareness, prevention for people planning to take their own lives, and overall just a general sense of being nice to one another. Story 106. 1. Football team made national news for sodomizing new members with their thumbs. 2. 8th grader convinced a special ed girl to give him head. 3. Girl got addicted to drugs, began selling herself, and eventually was beheaded by drug dealers. 4. Kid got sent away for performing oral on his dog. 5. Girl in 6th grade got digitally stimulated by another 6th grader through her ripped jeans. Jesus, I had a screwed up school, huh? Story 107. In my sophomore year of high school, 2012, I met this lovely person by the name of Caitlin in my English class, and we hit it off instantly, being paired for an assignment. She was pretty much everything that I could like from a person at the time. She listened to weird music, was fond of skateboarding, and she was a runner. Talking and joking the entire time and not even focused on the actual work, I definitely felt I found my best friend. Fast forwarding many months later, and we became as close as 2 people can be. After school we would run, listen to music, sharing our earphones together, often listening to our favorite band at the time, Beach Fossils, and sometimes grab a bite to eat and just hang. Well, one day I finally asked her if she would like to maybe start dating, if she would want to be my girlfriend. She said yes, and we shared a kiss to seal the deal. Just one day of starting our relationship, I find out that same night she took her own life. Finding out about that news the next morning, I wanted to throw up and felt the sense of dread. My life felt close to being completely empty and like a void emerged. The entire time I thought I knew her. I found out she was a schizophrenic and didn't even mention it to me once. I don't know why she took her own life or ever found out. She was always eccentric, but I never could have guessed she suffered from such a mental illness. Though when you grow older and understand severe mental illnesses like that, I can only imagine the torture she must have dealt with every day. But to not even let me share that burden with her was what hurt the most. I didn't care what was with her, and I was happy for who she was. I wish she only valued her life as much as I did. Going on 7 years later, and I'm still haunted by her beautiful face when I reminisce on a past life. Just those moments you share with a person when you sneak a beer on a cool autumn night to drink and look at the stars above and just genuinely talk. It's unforgettable. Here's to hoping you're at peace now, Caitlin, and you have a sound mind we all deserve. Story 108. My junior year, our school went on lockdown during first hour, and nobody knew why, beyond that there was a gunshot heard on campus. I was with the marching band about 2 blocks away at a stadium doing our morning practice, and we went on lockdown and just kept practicing. For the next 2 hours, the story changed from an active shooter inside the school to a boy taking his own life outside of the Fine Arts building. By the time we were allowed back to the school, the street cleaners had come and cleaned the concrete, so bleach water was flowing through the parking lot. It was the Thursday before homecoming, and we changed everything to be purple out. So did the opposing team. It was a good time for mental health support in our area, until they found the kids' YouTube channel and other social media. Target practice, just a video of the hallways through passing time, and weird bios where he talked about murdering women and children and assaulting them. Messed up, serial murderer type stuff. We just sort of stopped talking about it and shoved it under a rug. It's crazy to think that my school was possibly going to be in a school shooting, but turned out to have someone taking their own life on campus instead. Story 109. A junior got shot in the head with a shotgun less than 5 miles from the school in a mistaken identity while he was just trying to score a little pot. Another kid died of a heart attack during church service. He was a receiver on the football team. Story 110. I don't know the story exactly, but basically a father of a student shot and murdered his lawyer, or something along those lines, nearby the school. He then went home, murdered his wife and youngest son. He then called his oldest son to pick up the middle child and come home, so he could presumably murder them too. Anyway, I'm not entirely sure what happened, but I believe the oldest was murdered because he went home anyway without picking up the middle child. Later, the father also died, either by himself or police, and the living child was picked up by police and essentially shipped off without a word. I wish I had solid details, but the story was told to me by a counselor when I went back to visit my high school a couple months ago, and I've been unable to find any news articles online about it. No news articles is a bit suspicious here. Family annihilators typically end up all over the news, at the very least the local news. Either way, an incredibly horrific and terrible thing to happen. Story 111. I attended a private all-girls middle/high school. My junior year, the headmaster of 26 years retired. He was an incredibly sweet and gentle man who cared deeply about every one of his students. Needless to say, everyone in my class was sad about this because we had expected that he would be there for our senior year. But life goes on, and our final school year seems to be going off without too much difficulty, until March before graduation. I was at play practice when I learned that my former headmaster had died in a car crash just hours before. No one knew how to process this information. This man had been like a father to many of us, and for him to die without warning or ceremony, honestly it felt like the universe had disrespecting him. For days, girls could be seen sobbing in the hallways, and it made the days leading up to graduation bittersweet. Story 112. There was the senior that everyone knew. She was well-liked, participated in a million clubs, loved by all teachers, and had a full-ride scholarship waiting for her on her way out. A couple weeks before graduation, someone hit her with a car, and she lost her life. I remember being in freshman year and the announcements coming on to tell everyone she had died. A lot of the people in my class started crying, and counseling was given to anyone who asked for it. Another thing of note that my school covered up was the assistant music teacher that was a predator and attempted to hook up with a lot of the students. He also apparently hit on the senior who died. My school fired him quickly, and no one even knew about it until my friend who ate lunch in the music teacher's room saw an email about it. Story 113. My junior year, the senior hockey goalie during senior night scored on himself, flipped off the coaches, saluted the fans, and skated off the rink. He was upset that a sophomore that was much better than him got more playing time, so he made an absolute fool of himself and ended up getting knocked back 2 years in the military. They didn't let him join for 2 years after that. Kind of put my high school on the map in the crappiest way. Not nearly as graphic as a lot of these, but we didn't really have anything too special at my school. Story 114. This happened a few years out of high school, but a girl from my grad class was driving from our city to another with her friend and 2 passengers. Her ex-boyfriend tracked them to a popular convenience store store in a town halfway between the two cities, waited until they left, then ran them off the highway outside of town and shot all 4 people on board, before ultimately turning the gun on himself. The best friend survived. Aside from that, one kid got arrested for repeatedly attempting to SA women outside of the local hospital, and another one stole a truck and tore it across the prairie with cops in pursuit until the engine literally burst into flames. He added me on PSN when he got out of prison, but I don't know. Not sure I need his kind of getaway driving in my life. Story 115. My best friend and his older brother were racing to the hospital one night because their mom had called and said their grandmother was close to passing. On the way to the hospital, his older brother, who was the one driving, fell asleep at the wheel. They crashed into a semi-truck head-on, and they both lost their lives. 2 hours later, their grandmother passed as well. Story 116. There's been a few. First one is maybe the closest to me. Someone in my friend circle hung himself. It was the first day of our junior year. I said hi and talked to him for a bit. That day he went home and hung himself after his parents got into a fight. They announced it during second period. Apparently later on they even announced how he died, which is screwed up. Second were brother and sister who died. They were driving to another city to show some of their cattle. Little sister being about 16 and on the phone when they were T-boned by another vehicle. Both died. The students took the desks those two sat at from their various classes and wrote messages on them. Last one was my teacher. She had a history of cancer for several years. She talked about it when she introduced herself to us. My mom was a teacher at that school, so I would always hear about that teacher's battle. She'd have days where she would come in and be fine, but slowly those stopped happening, and she was so weak. We had subs a lot towards the end. Before prom, she passed. Super sad time to watch that happen to her. She was so young and wanted a family. She had just gotten married. Story 117. I went to a predominantly Asian school with a lot of high expectations from the students who went there. Pretty much everyone was pressured to do well, and while there were a few who didn't, most students ended up sacrificing their childhood so they could do well academically. This happened last year, but a student essentially felt like a failure because she was taking extremely challenging courses, but she wasn't by any means a bad student. She was a junior, thought she wouldn't get into any college, and for a family who immigrated here with very little, she ended up sinking the boat. The weekend after she hung herself, we were in our first period classes, and my teacher just reiterated how life goes on after high school and that it's not the end. It was an extremely sad day for a lot of people. I think if she realized how bright and kind she was and talked to someone, she wouldn't have done it. Story 118. I went to a very small school in the boonies. There were 34 people in my class before we consolidated with the school down the road. Ended up graduating with 64 after the consolidation. Before we consolidated, we had a foreign exchange student. Yes, even though we were that small, we still had at least one foreign exchange student every year. He was from Thailand. We called him Pop. He was well-liked and pretty funny. Him and his foreign exchange family were on a trip to Disney World. If I remember correctly, the weather wasn't so great on the way down there. Pop was traveling with, I believe, 7 other people. The boyfriend of one of the girls in the family was driving. He hit a median, flipped the van, and if I remember correctly, only the boyfriend, the father of the kids, and one of the girls survived. Can't imagine how Pop's family felt. Story 119. One of the girls in my school was found walking around at night covered in blood and naked. She had been abducted, SA'd, and hit in the head with a hatchet. Took them until the last few weeks to catch the guy, and this all happened in 2015. She survived, thankfully. There was another guy that was at his girlfriend's house and put a revolver in his mouth and took his own life in the same room as her and her mother. There was some other crap too, but I think those were the worst. Story 120. Last year at the elementary school I went to, the kids were let out for recess and there was a severely autistic 6-year-old boy who wandered away from the person looking after him. The playground was kind of far away from the school and was right by open woods, which led to some houses on the other side. The boy walked into the woods, fell into someone's pool, and drowned. The people living in the house were completely devastated. Apparently, the family of the boy sued the school district for millions for not having a fence around the playground. Our community was devastated for weeks. Story 121. There was a sophomore in my high school who randomly died, as in, he went to bed at night and just never woke up. He was a completely healthy, fit guy. I forgot the reason of his death, but it had something to do with his brain. Was also a dorky, smart kid who was kind of popular with the band kids since he was on the varsity marching band. The whole assembly held for him was incredibly sad. Everybody was at a loss for words. Story 122. Several years before I moved to my tiny town and K-12 school, the tragedy was that a senior lost his life while running through town practicing for a cross-country meet. But then the 90s hit and the tragedies became the time 4 popular kids got in a wreck on the way home from the movies, and 2 of them had to be flown to major trauma centers. Thankfully, they all survived. Then our music director's son died following a prolonged terminal illness. One of the math teachers lost a child or nephew to SIDS. We had a guy threaten to bomb the school and then ambush the cops when they showed up at his place, never saw him again. And a few years after we graduated, one of the most well-liked teachers/basketball coach died in a fall. Story 123. There are a couple, but they happened in elementary school. They just stick out, and I've never shared them with anyone who didn't go to our school. It was a pretty small school in a small town, so we all knew everyone's names and stuff. First was a boy who was super friendly and would share his books with me when I would forget them, was super smiley and just a happy kid. Couple of days go by and I notice he isn't sitting next to me. His name tag is missing from his desk, and nobody knows where he is. After asking about him, we find out he had drowned in his family's pond. I still have his math book with his name written all sloppy inside. The second made it slightly further. He was super outgoing and funny, had a couple brothers I also knew and was in class with. One day he tells us he has cancer, leukemia I think it was, and then soon after that, I think over the summer, we were told he lost his battle, and I never truly understood what that meant until I was older and realized he had died. Story 124. A kid who I always thought was fairly popular, well-liked, and funny, took his own life by connecting one end of a hose to a car exhaust and running the other end through the car's window, where he sat until asphyxiating. What really struck me is how unexpected it was, since, like I said, he always seemed pretty cheerful. Also, even people who I kind of doubt were ever in the same room with him were suddenly his friend posthumously, which I remember thinking was a cheap and tawdry way for them to try and shift the attention to themselves. Another guy died driving drunk. He received less fanfare, but still a good amount. Story 125. One of the girls in my friend group developed a rare type of blood cancer in the 10th grade. She fought for 2 years and died shortly before graduation. Another girl in a different friend group of mine took her own life in 11th grade. Her brother, who was also a close friend, shot himself a year later. Then, in 12th grade, one of the school's favorite special needs students passed away suddenly, and shortly after graduation, another friend of mine who had briefly dated the girl who died of cancer wrapped a car around a tree while drunk. And those are just the people around my age I knew personally. Story 126. When I was in middle school, a kid got meningitis and passed away, and they named a skate park after him. In high school, there were plenty of car wrecks, although I don't think there were any fatal ones with people specifically in my class. There was a particularly bad crash that took the lives of 4 kids. There was 1 or 2 ODs as H started getting popular. When I was a sophomore, freshmen took their own life, and then about a week later, their SO also took their own life. Those are only the things I was made aware of. My school never sent out any info or included any memorials in the yearbook, probably because it would be too often or take up too many pages. This was in the suburbs, 2004 to 2008, at a school of about 4,000 students. Story 127. I didn't know any of them, but there have been so many gang-related deaths just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I might be downvoted to all hell, but as horrible as it is, I don't find their deaths to be the main tragedy. I find that everyone pretending they knew the deceased for a couple days and then completely forgetting they existed except for the friends and teachers of that student worse. One of the more recent ones, all over the school's Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook, they, as in the students, asked everyone to wear black in honor of him. The very next week, no one remembered his name. Story 128. Entire high school of less than 1,000 students. Senior takes shrooms with his underclassman girlfriend. She passes out and he freaks out. He runs butt naked across a highway at night, crashes through a stranger's front window. Thank goodness they were on vacation, and bleeds to death on their couch. He was a jerk and a bully, and while I'm sorry for his family, it feels like a punch in the gut that he has a section of the local library dedicated to him. Story 129. This happened a little after I graduated, but there was going to be a party at some house. One of my old friends and baseball teammates was going to it with 2 of his other friends, and they stopped at a bar beforehand, all underage. When they were driving there, they drove right into a man-made pond right across from the house they were going to, and all 3 were trapped inside the truck, as people from the party ran over and tried breaking the glass but couldn't. The one dude actually watched his friend die, trying to save him. Story 130. Not sure if secondary school counts, but here goes. A junior schoolmate of mine, also a teammate of mine in our school rugby team, succumbed to the severe injuries he got in a traffic accident at the main road outside of our school. He was rushing to cross the road when a car hit him in the middle of it and got hospitalized for severe head trauma until he died a few days later. He was 14 years old. It not only affected my rugby team, our U15 squad was scheduled to play the week he died, but the whole school as well. Last I remembered, there were calls from my principal for more speed regulating measures or an overhead bridge. The road is right after an expressway exit, but even now only a traffic light crossing is in place for students to cross the road. My recollection of that tragedy is fuzzy because it happened 15 years ago, and it also came after the deaths of my mother and my granduncle. So when you say more speed regulating measures, do you mean there are no speed bumps or anything, like proper signage of a school zone? Because a kid really shouldn't need to get hit for that to, come to mind. That seems pretty common around schools in my area. I feel like it's common sense, though. People, especially children, are more likely to be around the road near a school, and children in particular more likely to run across it. Therefore, just slow down. Sure, you could be like, well, they shouldn't run onto the road. Yeah, but they're kids. They're gonna do stupid stuff. Just be careful. Story 131. We were the first graduating class at my high school, and at the beginning of the second semester of our freshman year, one of my classmates died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. It was ruled an accident, and the official story is that he was given this antique handgun as a gift, loaded it, and decided to sleep with it under his pillow where it went off accidentally and shot him. He was on life support at the Children's Hospital for about 24 hours until his dad was able to get in town from out of state. Most of us were pretty sure it was intentional for various reasons. He was generally happy and really caring and a sweet guy, but there were several small details that made us think it wasn't an accident. Being such a small class, our school basically shut down for the rest of the week. It was still open and classes were still held, but we weren't obligated to go, and we were able to do pretty much whatever we needed in order to get through it. It'll actually be 6 years since his death on the 23rd of this month. I still get choked up thinking about him sometimes. I wasn't super close with him, but he was always so kind and funny, and he smelled like watermelon whenever I hugged him. I was one of the first people to actually find out he had died, and I had to read it on Facebook. What made it all the more sad is his mom lost a battle to cancer our senior year, leaving her husband and daughter and grandson behind. They put a bell up in the hallway in his honor that students could ring whenever they accomplished something great. They're moving campuses next year, and will be installing the bell in the new building. Story 132. The stretch of Highway 401 between my hometown and Windsor was nicknamed Death Alley during my senior year. It seemed every few days there was a traffic fatality on that 80-kilometer stretch of the road. There was a girl in my senior year who was one of those hot girls but with substance. She was smart and she was selfless. She volunteered her time with the special needs children in our school and was going to university next year on a scholarship to become a special needs teacher. Sadly, she got into a car with her friend, who was an idiot. The story goes that she was taking a nap in the back seat, so wasn't wearing a seatbelt. The driver lost control of his vehicle. We think he hit the rumble strip at a high speed and overcorrected too quickly. The car crashed into the guardrail on the other side of the highway and was totaled. He walked away. The friend in the passenger seat was in the hospital for a long time, weeks at least, maybe months, and she died at the scene. The police would later say that given the tire marks and the damage, there was no way the car was going slower than 140 kilometers an hour. That's 40 above the limit. Since she was so nice and liked, everyone in our senior class was affected by this death. Sad thing is, I think she really could have made an impact on the world, at least wherever she chose to go. Now we'll never know. Don't speed, and wear a seatbelt. Story 133. One of my high school's science teachers / my soccer coach lost his life to a drunk driver during my junior year. It was his first year teaching, only 24, but everyone already loved him. One early Saturday morning, him and his wife, newly married / high school sweethearts, were on the interstate headed up north to spend the weekend with family, and a piece of crap drunk driver was driving the wrong way and crashed straight into them. The wife had minor injuries. He lost his life instantly. The POS driver whose car flipped over the median and burst into flames was basically uninjured. Thankfully, he went to jail, and as a requirement from the judge, he had to have a picture of my soccer coach in his cell until he was free. There was constant crying from pretty much everyone that Monday. He was an amazing teacher and coach. Now there's a memorial soccer tournament every year in honor of him, a scholarship fund, and they started a Students Against Drunk Driving club. It's stuff like this that makes me despise people who drive drunk. Screw anyone who does it. Story 134. We had an attempted school shooting. When he was approached, he knew he was caught and drove off. What's disturbing is he was parked next to me before we knew his plans. I waved and he smiled and waved back. Shot himself at the University of Central Missouri parking lot. On one side, I was relieved he didn't get to finish his plans on shooting up the school, but I'm also sad he ended himself. I'm lucky we didn't end up like many other schools. I still didn't feel safe at school after that, though. It was hard to imagine a classmate was willing to take our lives. A month later, a teammate of mine ended himself because his mom hated the fact he was gay. Story 135. I've got a few. 1. A girl was essayed, and if her friend had not escaped when they were being attacked, they probably would have lost their lives. I knew both of them, not like BFFs, but we would hang out. 2. A girl took her own life. I didn't personally know her, but I was upset at the people who didn't know her and were crying over her death. 3. A couple of guys got into a horrible car accident, only one surviving, and I know him. Again, not like a BFF, but anyway, he survived. The car exploded, so he has burn scars covering his body. When one of my close friends showed me his picture, I thought he was an old man at first. It's just sad. If you've ever seen Bad Grandpa, that's what he looked like. Story 136. Ray got drunk and stole a car. He showed up after a local show and picked up Tony, Ashley, and Kyle. I think their names were Ashley and Kyle. I only knew Tony and Ray. Anyway, a cop tries to pull them over and Ray books it. He's doing something like 60 in a 35. Hits the curb, catches some air, and slams the car into a brick wall. Ashley and Tony lost their lives. Kyle survives, but he's out for a while. When he comes back, he's in a wheelchair with a broken leg or two. I think he made a fullish recovery. Ray goes through the windshield and he's just fine. He runs and hides in the bushes. Some dogs found him. Ray was a jerk. I never liked that dude, though I guess some people did. Everyone, and I mean everyone, loved Tony. His death was felt all over the county. I hadn't hung out with him much recently, but he was one of my best friends in elementary school, and he spent all summer, every summer, playing basketball at the local pool. I don't really know what Ashley's deal was. She might have been new in town or something. I didn't hear so much about her. When Kyle got back to school, he was an instant celebrity. I never really met him, but I sure knew who he was after that. The wheelchair and cast sure made him stand out. He seemed to be in surprisingly good spirits, all things considered. In conclusion, Ray, if you're reading this, I still hate your freaking guts, just so we're clear. Story 137. This kid in my year when I was 14 jumped in front of a train and died. He left a note saying the bullying had become too much and he was ending it, thanking the few friends he had. We had a memorial every year. As a bullied chubby kid, this hurt me, because I felt like I could have been his friend, but I wasn't. A bully from my class said during the class talk we had on the subject that he knew him. Not that he bullied him, but I know he did. The guy wasn't as much of a bully after that, though. Once walked out of a class when I was in teacher training because the professor admitted to being a bully when he was in high school and telling us some of the crap he did. That stuff doesn't sit well with me anymore. Story 138. Small town with quite a few screwed up tragedies. A guy in the community was stabbed to death, and during the police chase that followed, a buddy of mine got hit by the murderer's van. He survived with a couple pins in his leg. Other friend of mine got hit by a semi while crossing the road on a four-wheeler. He was in a coma for 3 to 4 months and was out of school for a couple of years, but ended up recovering just fine. One of my best friends growing up shot himself an hour after school started in the morning, and we slowly found out around lunch, and everything and everyone just kind of shut down for the rest of the day. And last but not least, 2 seniors were racing their sports cars on the highway around midnight and ended up rolling 10 plus times. Messed up part was the passenger got thrown 100 plus feet into a barbed wire fence and essentially got cut into a whole lot of pieces. Yeah, small towns suck. Story 139. A kid with a disability, either autism or cerebral palsy, was in a motorized wheelchair and nonverbal. He died during open heart surgery. Shockingly enough, my classmates loved the kid. He would always try and run people over in the hallways and was generally just a really humorous guy, even though 99% of the students at my high school hate the disabled and were quite discriminatory and exclusive towards them. We gathered in the atrium to mourn him, and a huge paper mural was on the wall where people could write their farewell wishes. My best friend cried with my ex. My best friend was dating my ex at the time, and I cried with my boyfriend into his shoulder. A few days later, his parents came to our school and we all wore blue, his favorite color. We also each held one balloon and let them float into the sky. The kid's death was put in a small article in our school's magazine, but otherwise he lives on through a scholarship, which I believe is awarded to a student whose future career is a physical, occupational, or speech therapist. His brother, I think, or maybe it was his cousin, I don't know, worked at the supermarket behind my old house. Never got to say hi, unfortunately. Screw social anxiety. Rest in peace, Connor. An absolutely tragic story and everything, but OP, what do you mean your school hated the disabled? Like, everyone? What was going on there? What a weird little nugget of information to put in this story that makes me want to know more about what the hell was going on. Story 139. While I went to said school, probably one of the best dudes, Kenan was his name, died in his sleep from a seizure. Everybody was pretty upset about it, but his parents knew what kind of humor he had, and for his funeral video, they played Party in the USA because he joked about that song so much. The ultimate worst tragedy the school has had in general, though, was that it was one of the many high school shootings that have already happened this year. January 23rd, small town, western Kentucky, made national news for something you never want to see happen. I live hours away and graduated 8 years ago, but it brought me to tears and really saddened me. Story 140. There were 3 ones I can remember. Well, I guess 4 at least. There was a kid who was really good in drum corps, I think, and one day before school his dad shot him in the face with a crossbow. Then he was en route to go murder his other son, but then took his own life along the way. The second one was a girl who was in my class and was an acquaintance of mine. She sat next to me in class and we used to share music. She was also the only other person I knew with big over-ear headphones, so we would chat about that too. But anyway, she was leaving the building after class and said, "See you tomorrow," and a wave. I found out a few hours later she was riding a horse behind the school on a trail when it had a heart attack and sent her flying. She broke her neck and died right there. It was pretty crazy. This next one happened my senior year, but according to my friend who lives on the same street as the kid, he was a freshman who was getting bullied and he hung himself in his garage while his parents were out of town on vacation. When they came home, they saw him inside. The last one was a girl writing in period blood on the bathroom walls that she was going to murder everyone at the school. Story 141. My junior year, there was a sweet girl that was murdered along with her mother by her father, in their home with a shotgun. He then took his own life too. It was horrible. She was nice to everyone, no one disliked her, and the whole school came together to mourn. Her boyfriend, who I've been starting to reconnect with years later, is also the absolute nicest guy you'll ever meet. They would have probably gotten married if she hadn't lost her life, and the poor guy is still dealing with the emotional fallout. Story 142. The year of death is how I think of it personally. It's my sophomore year, about March, just getting out of winter. I hear a few things about a senior who left school because he was diagnosed with leukemia, but I didn't know him, so I didn't keep up. It hits May, and he dies. He was an athlete, so a lot of people knew him, and being so close to graduation, it was especially hard. Over the summer, an upcoming senior gets fatally shot by a stray bullet in a gang shooting. I know even less about her and didn't have school in session to learn more, but apparently a really hardworking student and was just walking home from her job. November rolls around. I'm in my school's JROTC unit, and one of the instructors doesn't show for the Veterans Day ceremony. No call, no nothing. This is one of the big events of the year. Local veterans and politicians, etc. And this was the senior instructor, very well respected in the community. The ceremony finishes and other JROTC instructors are deflecting when students ask about the missing teacher. And at the end of the day, they call all the JROTC students to the auditorium. A few months earlier, a cadet walked to school with a girl who was nearly kidnapped. A different story, but they called everyone to commend that guy, so we thought it was something similar. Instead, the principal breaks down crying, telling us the instructor had taken his own life, lit himself on fire in a park that morning. This instructor played a very big role in students' lives as a mentor and an advocate, so everyone is devastated. I don't remember exactly when, but around this time, a middle schooler also took their own life. He was bullied for a long time, apparently. January. My friend and I go to a diner. We see a kid from school there. He's one of those class clowns who's nice to everyone and kind of full of himself, but he genuinely knows how to make people around him laugh. The next day at school, first thing they call all seniors to the auditorium. Not uncommon. Maybe they want to talk about graduation or something. The thing that was weird is that my teacher didn't know what it was about, and usually they would know if there was an assembly. So I find the same friend from the day before and we share the uncomfortable observation of all the social workers and administration standing around, just like with the JROTC instructor from a few months earlier. Turns out the kid we had seen just yesterday had died. After the diner, he went racing down the highway with his friends, lost control of his car around a bend, and he was dead before the car stopped at the third tree it hit. Story 143. This wasn't just the high school, but I think like 20 years after the school I go to was built, it burned down, like the entire thing, from the elementary to the high school. It was obviously rebuilt, seeing as I'm currently attending it, but the auditorium is said to be pretty haunted. It was built where I believe the elementary school used to be, and apparently some people died there. I don't know, the entire town is weird. It's a small town, like the kind they talk about in horror movies small. There are weird things that happen a lot though. A lot of it is unexplainable, so yeah, literal ghost town. Story 144. 2008 or so. A story was going around at my high school that someone had told one of the students at the local gas station in town that they'd put a bomb in a locker. So it hits about midday and we start class. About half an hour in, the northern building's fire alarm can be heard, then our building goes off. The school goes about following fire drill procedure and everyone files onto the field, people talking about the bomb, etc. Head teacher walks into the middle with a megaphone and tells us to go to the main hall and debrief us. So I'm standing in the middle of the hall with my house. People talking, girls crying, a panic. The headmaster ensures us there was no bomb, and we resume our day as normal. Story 145. None in high school, but a few in elementary and middle. 1. When I was in second grade, I remember one morning over the intercom the principal revealing the news that a kindergartner had died over the weekend due to health issues. She was in my brother's class, so he knew her personally. 2. Same school as the first. In my second grade class that same year, this weird kid transferred schools and got out into my class. Kid was super weird. He's literally pooped his pants in class one day. However, he was pretty cool after that, and I hung out with him a few times. At the 5th grade graduation party, it was at my classmate's house, and it was a pool party. The kid couldn't swim. Didn't tell anyone. My crush found him face down in the pool. Was too late, and the paramedics couldn't save him. 3. In kindergarten, I had a mean bus driver, but he was super nice to me. He was old, but suddenly died mid-school year. 4. The year after I graduated middle school, the principal at said middle school died. 5. Closest I've had to a potential tragedy in high school was a tsunami threat last month. Or a few months ago, we were on lockdown and high alert because someone threatened to shoot up the school. Story 146. A girl in my class took her own life. She was overall well-liked, and while she spent a lot of time away from school due to her depression, she still always had someone to hang out with whenever she showed up. We were never close, as I was a very introverted person myself, and so her death didn't impact me all that much. I've never been that affected by tragedies, but there is one part about it all that leaves her face and the day we were told she died burned in my mind. It's when our teacher told us that according to her parents, the happiest parts of her life in that final year was when she was well enough to come to school and hang out with fellow students. Something about knowing that the quiet, kind-hearted girl that I would be working with in health class, who always seemed kind of sad, was at her happiest in those moments really stuck with me. Story 147. A girl in my high school had a sister a few years older who had also gone to the school. The end of the school year in my state is also the end of the calendar year, and the graduates get out a few months earlier because they had already done their final exams. So she and another friend who also graduated went to the school and got a job. The two of them were driving early in the morning to their job, and it is suspected the driver swerved to avoid an animal because they crashed into a tree and died about 2 weeks before Christmas. I don't think she coped well with going from a younger sister to an only child. Next year, the principal mentioned the tragedy in passing at the end-of-year whole school assembly during her address speech, and she instantly raced out of the gym crying. Story 148. My friend died December 20th, 2017. No one really knows what happened, not even most of the teachers. He was found dead outside the school campus and apparently had been unconscious for a few hours before he died. The overwhelming consensus is it was self-inflicted, but I don't actually know. This kid was one of the sweetest I knew. He was smart, never messed with anyone, and was never unkind. I love you, buddy. How the school handled it, this makes me so angry. They didn't even tell me he died, just a few students. I had to hear from them. We never had a memorial service or anything. The teachers never addressed it to the class once, besides when we signed a card for the kid's parents. No grief counseling, nothing. I hate that the teachers don't say anything to the kids. We just want closure. My grandma died on December 21st, the morning afterward. Needless to say, those 2 days really screwed me up. Story 149. It was midway into first period. We can hear clamoring and shouting coming from out in the halls. The teacher gets up to see what's going on and then comes back in and keeps us all in class even when the bell rings. Enough students had gotten texts or other messages to know what was going on. A student had doused himself in gasoline at the back of the parking lot and lit himself on fire. He ran towards the school screaming and flailing, where a number of students and teachers who could witness this from their room immediately ran to help. They managed to extinguish the flame and he was rushed to a burn center, but he didn't survive. It was beyond traumatizing for the people who witnessed it, and especially so for those who rushed to the scene firsthand. We had psychologists and therapists at the school for about a month for people to talk to. There were reports of students being unable to sleep or shower, seeing a burnt body whenever they pulled back the curtains or closed their eyes. I'm thankful I didn't witness it, but was heartbroken when it happened. The student had apparently been depressed and had a number of physical ailments that gave him an early death sentence. He had already surpassed his expected survival by several years, but the effects became too overwhelming for him. The perspective we were presented with was that he was freeing himself from his current suffering, but this doesn't explain why he chose to go out the way he did. That's something I don't think any of those affected will find out. That is definitely something no one should really ever have to deal with, let alone teachers and students. These are people not at all equipped for that kind of situation. I don't know how many people are. Definitely a huge tragedy, and a lot of trauma to go with it. How fun. Anyway, that was the last story for today. An entire thread of tragedies has been pretty rough on me. I don't know about you guys. As always, after tough ones, I encourage you to do something for yourselves. Turn on some music, draw, although I know a lot of you do that already while you're listening to these. I've read the comments, but just take some time to chill and do something enjoyable. Get those happy chemicals going because this was a lot. My heart goes out to all those affected by these tragedies. It was a lot of stuff in here that no one should have to deal with, let alone people that young, still in school, still developing their brains, and then they have this thrown at them. Life can suck, man. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.